Today I start off filming of a very important documentary film, Pandit Totaram Sanadhya-A Visionary Girmitya. Uh, we left Delhi and we are traveling to Agra. Here with me is my friend and support person by Aslam Khan, and we first traveled to Agra, and from there we traveled to Ferozabad, and we are hoping to meet the grandson of Pandit Chaturvedi, and we're going to talk to him about the role that Pandit Banarasidas Chaturvedi played. This is Ferozabad, and where Pandit Chaturvedi was born and lived most of his life. And not far from here, about 12 kilometers away, is a place called Hirangaon, where Pandit Totaram Sanadhya was born. And this is where, after spending 21 years as a Girmitya in Fiji, he came over here and met up with Pandit Chaturvedi. And how that very interesting meeting took place, I'll ask Dr. Chaturvedi, who is a grandson of Panditji. He is going to tell us about that great meeting. Panditji.
As far as I know, from what I have heard from my grandfather, whom we call Baba, he was teaching in Delhi College, Indore, Pandit Banarasidas. He came here, it was his hometown, and before that he was teaching in college in Ferozabad near here. He was in between transit from Ferozabad to Delhi College, Indore. In between he came here, he used to go on long walks, and he met Pandit Totaram Sanadhya on one of his walks, and Totaram ji told about his part of the story of Girmitya labor, and how he went to Fiji, how he came back from there, and what the people there who went as Girmit were facing, the problems they were facing, what the life was there. And then Baba took notes from him about the story of Pandit Totaram Sanadhya. He used to write a lot in Arimitra, Chand and other papers. He had already started writing as a journalist. And when he met Pandit Totaram Sanadhya, he took whole of the story of Pandit Totaram Sanadhya, was not able to read or write. So he narrated his story as a biography of Pandit Totaram Sanadhya, only those 21 years which he spent there in Fiji. He went there as Girmitya Mazdoor. Girmit they were called because they were under government contract. Actually it was indentured labor in the name of government contract. People went there, worked as indentured labor instead of guaranteed labor.
Okay. On that note, I mean, today we know, everybody in the world knows that the credit of abolishing Girmit goes mainly to Gandhiji, and along with the name comes Charles Freer Andrews, and hardly anybody talks about Pandit Sanadhya and Pandit Chaturvedi. Their contribution, my 21 years in Fiji, the book which was written by Pandit Chaturvedi, we'll talk about that a bit later. I want to go back when Totaram was a young boy, and as a 17-year-old, he left the village over here, and he went. He was taken to Fiji, and on the other hand, in the same year, 1893, Mohan Gandhi went to South Africa. Would you like to say the contrast between the travel of young Totaram, a boy from this village, and M.K. Gandhi?
The reason of Totaramji going out and Gandhiji going out were absolutely different. They were poles apart. Totaramji went there as an indentured labor, as a Girmitya Mazdoor, and Gandhiji went to South Africa as bar at law, as a barrister. There's a whole lot of difference between two of them going there. Gandhiji went there as a professional. He was hired by a businessman in South Africa to work for him. His passage was paid by him. Totaramji went there by a ship, which you can only compare to an animals or cocks being transported from one place to another. Once there was a plague in one of the ships, and all the indentured labor that were going Girmit were going there died on way. And half of the Girmit labor that were taken from here to other countries, they died because of diseases and starvation and other things. And half of them could reach there. So there's a stark difference between why Gandhiji went and how Gandhiji went, and why Totaram went and how he went there.
Since I have been researching on this particular documentary, I have read for many years, Gandhi has been called the Girmitya number one. Why do you think he's been called Girmitya number one when he went to South Africa as a professional barrister?
That's a stark difference between what we know and what we are told. Actually, Gandhiji worked for Girmitya when he was released from South Africa, when he came back from South Africa.
Now I'm going to travel to Hirangao, the village where Pandit Totaram Sanadhya was born, and what I've come to know, he spent his 17 years in his village, and tragedy struck in this village when his father, who was a Pandit, was a Brahmin, had died, and whatever little money and jewelry and things like that he was left by his father was depleted pretty quickly. His older brother then went to Calcutta to earn some money, and young Totaram went to school for 3 years. But after that, the financial issues still plagued the family, and on request of his mother, he then went to Prayagraj. This is Hirangao, and this is where a young boy of 17 years old left his widowed mother, and with 6 annas in his pocket went in search of work to Prayagraj. And from there, what he did created history, and because of his efforts, the Gulami Pratha the Girmit Pratha, the Indian indenture system, which saw more than 1 million people, young boys, girls and children, being plucked from the villages like this and from rest of the Uttar Pradesh, from Bihar, from Telangana, from Tamil Nadu, from Andhra Pradesh, from Madhya Pradesh, from Kerala, from Punjab, from Gujarat, from Haryana, being taken by the Europeans, by the British, by the French and others to work as slaves in the colonies far, far away from there. But this is a story of a young boy who was born over here somewhere, we don't know where, in one of the houses over here. His father was a Pandit, and apparently they were quite well-to-do middle-class family. Unfortunately, his father died, and when he died, he left the family with about 4,000 rupees in the way of gold and other jewelry. 4,000 rupees in those days, more in 1993, would, if you calculate it in today's money, would have been about 6 crore. But unfortunately, the goldsmith and other jewelers took advantage of the widow and the two brothers, Totaram and his older brother. And soon the money ran out. Totaram was going to school. Then his elder brother went to Calcutta to work, and he sent some money back to here. But unfortunately, the money was not good. And on the mother's suggestion, young Totaram, at the age of 17 years, with 6 annas in his pocket, walked along the road from here all the way to Prayagraj. He walked for 16 days and he reached Prayagraj in search of work. Unfortunately, after trying very hard, young Totaram was not able to get any work. For some time, a good person gave him shelter and he stayed with him for a while. And during that period, the Arkati met up with Totaram and he promised him job. And of course, Totaram wanted to have job, employment. He wanted to do good for his mother. And so he went with the Arkati, the recruiter, and he stayed in a house where he met many other young boys and girls and children like him. From there, all of them were taken to Calcutta, and from Calcutta, after they were made to put their thumbprint on the Indentured agreement, they were taken to various parts of the colonies, and Totaram was taken to Fiji. The 17-year-old Totaram didn't know when he was put on the ship that he would be taken many thousands of miles away to Fiji. He went there. The journey took about 3 months. He spent 5 years as a girmitya. He worked on the plantation over there. And for whatever reason, he decided to stay in Fiji and to help the other girmityas. What he did, I'm going to tell you later. But 21 years later, he came back to India. He came back to this village over here along with his wife and his mother-in-law. And then his restless soul continued to worry about the Girmityas. And somewhere along here in Ferozabad lived Pandit Chaturvedi. The two met, and between them a book was written. The book was called Mere Kish What's Fiji Brief Mein. Baad mein, later it was translated into my 21 years in Fiji Island. That book became instrumental in abolishing the Girmit Pratha here. So, for us, descendants of Girmityas in the diaspora, as well as descendants of the families from where Girmityas were taken, all around over here, is this village, Hirangau, is very, very important. Because if this young boy, Totaram, was not born, didn't get the education he needed, perhaps in the laps of his father, Pandit Sanadhya, maybe with the influence of his mother, young boy rose to become, in my mind, the most important person in the Girmit history, especially the history of abolition of Girmit, Indian indentured system. So I'm thankful to this village. I'm thankful to his father, Pandit Sanadhya. I'm thankful to his mother that they gave Totaram, who later became Pandit Totaram, to us, the Girmit world. I'm standing here on the grounds of Sabarmati Ashram, which is dedicated to Gandhiji. This ashram is located on the banks of this beautiful Sabarmati river. It is a well-known fact that Gandhiji did a lot for the business community of South Africa, because he was called by a businessman of South Africa to help him in his legal cases. He stayed there eventually for 21 years, and we know that he also in the process helped the Girmityas upon coming to India. He also joined the Indian National Congress efforts to wage a war against the Girmit Pratha, and he also played a significant role in that the fight, in that struggle. What is less known is the role played by Pandit Totaram Sanadhya and Pandit Banarasidas Chaturvedi, who I believe were the J and Viru of the global Girmit abolition movement. What is lesser known fact is that both Pandit Chaturvedi first and then Pandit Totaram Sanadhya spent significant period of their life after abolition in this ashram. We have been told by the grandson of Pandit Chaturvedi that Pandit Banarasidas Chaturvedi was called here by Gandhiji to help him in his publications to address the issues of global girmityas, and he came here in 1918 and later in 1922. Apparently he also called Pandit Totaram Sanadhya, who spent rest of his life along with his wife in this ashram, where he died in 1947. What we don't know is what happened to his wife after Panditji died. what we have learned from grandson of Pandit Banarasidas Chaturvedi, that because of some issues with Gandhiji, Pandit Chaturvedi had left this ashram after spending a few years here. I had a quick look around this ashram, and I've seen a lot of information about Gandhiji, and unfortunately I have not seen anything about the time spent by Pandit Chaturvedi and Pandit Totaram Sanadhya over here. It is unfortunate because they also played a significant role here. They dedicated their significant part of their lives over here. I'm not sure if there is any information at this ashram about the both Pandits. If somebody knows about that, please let me know. What is also very less known fact is that his fellow Girmitya in Fiji, Kunti, whose story is well known when she resisted attempted rape by a Colombo white supervisor, assisted by one of the Girmitya Sardars, and she preferred to give up her life rather than succumb to this sexual assault. She jumped in the Rewa River, which is a very large, well-known river in Fiji, but she was saved by another young Indian boy, and this story was widely publicized in India. And this story prompted people like Sarojini Naidu and Annie Besant to start this abolition struggle in India. And as I said, it's a little known fact that Kunti, along with her family, also returned to India in 1914, a few months after Pandit Totaram Sanadhya did, and she stayed in Calcutta apparently, and she joined the Marwaris at 56 Harrison Road, which is now known as MG Road, and joined the anti-abolition struggles. We don't know what happened to Kunti and her family. We know that her ancestral village is in Gorakhpur, and so if anybody knows about Kunti's family, her descendants now, please do let me know. Now I'm back in Delhi, and I'm going to speak to a person who actually prompted me through his article to embark on this journey of making this film. It's such a coincidence that although Fredrik lives in Germany, he is in Delhi at the moment, and we have been communicating through social media, and I'm glad that he's here. I'm glad that he wrote that article, and let's find out what he has to say about his interest in Pandit Totaram Sanadhya. Hello, I'm Satish Rai. I'm sitting here with a person who has come all the way from Germany to India, and we're sitting here in Delhi. And I let Fredrik introduce himself to you.
It's a great pleasure. My name is Fredrik and I'm a PhD student at the Free University in Berlin.
Fredrik, first of all, I'd like to know from you, as I said to you before, even from Sydney, Totaram Sanadhya-A, obscure, almost forgotten giant. How did you find him? And what made you write that wonderful article on him?
Thank you. Actually, I stumbled across Totaram Sanadhya when I was doing my studies in global history, and we were sort of doing a seminar on different forms of unfree labor. And then I, found the example of Fiji, of indentured labor to Fiji, and eventually ended up stumbling quite so over Totaram Sanadhya and his testimony, which offered a very different kind of perspective of approaching indentured labor, not from the perspective of the colonial state, but from the perspective of an actual Girmitya.
During your 3, 4, 5 year scholarship as a PhD candidate, you would have come across so many other interesting figures from history. Have you written an article or other articles on any other such figures, or was it this particular? I'm interested in what drew you to this person who I believe is a giant in the abolition movement, and what particularly drew you to this person, because he was there in Fiji and he did some work, but as a person, a German young man, far removed from Fiji, far removed from Girmit colony, far removed from India. How? Why? That's the question I want you to answer.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think maybe it is especially the distance itself that made Totaram Sanadhya so interesting. Because since I was, as a student, so removed from that context, and everything was that was all so foreign to me. You can read descriptions about this, but they're very abstract, right? You can read all the kind of literature, the encyclopedias. They will tell you so much, but they will only get you, at least half of the way, maybe even less. And so then approaching this, what was a very theoretical issue, the issue of what is unfree labor, what was indentured labor, how did that work in different parts of the British Empire, through the biography, the autobiography of one specific figure, who was then later, of course, so engaged in the whole struggle for its abolition, allowed me to bridge that distance and actually, metaphorically, move to Fiji with Sanadhya and experience what he experienced.
So in few words, what did you experience that Pandit Sanadhya experienced so many 100 odd years ago? Just give a brief description as to how you felt his journey was in Fiji.
The first thing that struck me when I first read Totaram Sanadhya's Fiji Memories was the profound emotional depth of his autobiography. So he talks about, not just suffering, but how he suffered, what he went through, how he was taken, from his home, how he was taken to Fiji, how he had to endure all the struggles that he had to endure. But then also, on the other side, how, he found community, how he inspired hope, and how he kind of found courage to, do what he did afterwards.
And somewhere along those struggles and helping the Girmityas of Fiji, he must have decided that this indenture system must stop, because he started the abolition movement from Fiji. What do you think made him take this step? Because there 1.2 million Girmityas were taken from India to various colonies, But there's one individual who decided that enough is enough, and he started a movement. What do you think was special about Totaram Sanadhya that he did that?
I think Sanadhya had a very special perception of Girmitya itself, because that's what he keeps talking about. He does narrate to us his own experience, but he doesn't stop there. So what he actually perceived, and I think that's the unique contribution of Sanadhya in that sense, was that he perceived indentured labor as a structure. He perceived the wider context of indentured labor, not only what it did to himself, but also what it did to the people that he was indentured with, and the people who were indentured in other places. So I think that's what made him, take up that struggle, because he took up the struggle of so many people, not just for himself.
You talk about he did take up struggle with so many, but the two people he wrote about, and those were Kunti and Raivision.
Yes.
What your understanding is about these two brave ladies of Girmit?
I found that was an extremely moving part of his text, because we know that it's the late 19th, early 20th century. The position of woman was a very difficult position. In that sense, it is surprising to see how emphatic Sanadhya writes about the specific struggles of women, the specific violence that women were subjected to, and the specific loss of agency, the loss of their own self-determination, that was even greater for women than it was for men in the ancient century.
Yes, and out of 1.2 million Girmityas, especially in case of Fiji, which I did study, 40% returned and 60% stayed back in Fiji for whatever reason. But out of all those 60,500, those who came back, they didn't take up the issue of abolition of Girmityas. Those who stayed remained back in Fiji, or even in the Girmit diaspora. We don't hear, they may have done it, but we don't hear of them. But this one particular person, when he exhausted all the possibilities in Fiji of fighting against the Girmit, he did come back to India and took up the challenge. He wrote to Gandhiji that he wanted a good lawyer in Fiji to fight the cases of the Girmityas, because the European lawyers would not take up the cases of the Girmityas. And Gandhiji could not come back, but eventually the person who took up the challenge was Manilal Doctor, and then his fees and passage had to be paid. And Totaram Sanadhya was instrumental in raising the money, and Dr. Manilal went to Fiji, and they had conversations and things like that, and it was on suggestion of Dr. Manilal that Totaram Sanadhya returned to India in 1914 to take up the challenge of abolition movement over here. So, not only he tried his best in Fiji, but he also returned, and his contribution was significant. And 1914 he came back, and in 1917 the Girmit was abolished. That's what I'm trying to say. So, he just not stay in Fiji. He came back. He reminds me somebody like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. He was persistent. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was persistent as well. So, your thoughts on that?
I think, so my thoughts are that Sanadhya was, from my perception, which of course we don't know because we can't ask Sanadhya, he was a very, very practical person. And that pertained to himself, and that pertained to others, and it pertained to his work for the cause of the abolition of indentured labor. And so when he realized that he could make a bigger difference by going back, that's what he did.
Yeah. Okay, so we know that it was abolished in 1917, and this year was 2020. We're sitting in Delhi. Is the year all the indenture agreements are finally over.
Yes.
He came over here. One thing which I have been to say is why did history almost forget him and the person who helped to write his book, Pandit Chaturvedi? Why? Your look on that?
Were it that South Asian history after the abolition of indentured servitude had been calm, probably we would not be sitting here today because Sanadhya would be a well-known person. But with everything that happened after the 1920s in India and in the other parts of South Asia, so many other pressing matters, I think, obscured this huge contribution in India specifically. And then the very specific situation in Fiji also meant that these kinds of figures became sidelined. So he was sort of, maybe he fell in between.
Yes, there's another question on this. We said the biggest struggles. In India, of course. But I've written about it, and it's even my feature film, it ends with that the abolition movement had won a battle. That means the Girmit was abolished. But the war was won by the British, the CSR in Fiji, because they managed to retain 60% of the Girmityas there so that they could continue with their enterprises in Fiji. And I've stated and proven that the majority of the Girmityas who were prevented from returning to India, they wanted to do so. They registered to come back and they were not. So there was a huge issue in India. They wanted to come back, but nobody was interested in that. Why do you think, do you have any thoughts on this at all? Why India forgot once they thought the Girmit was abolished and let those who were there remain in Fiji and struggle over there. They didn't want their own children to come back to India.
So I think we have to differentiate between families in India from whose children were taken to Fiji in indenture and the interests of the British. Because if we compare the abolition of indenture to the abolition of slavery, we find some interesting parallels, right? Former slave owners were compensated. Former slaves were hardly compensated, or in many cases weren't compensated at all. And so the persistence of working relationships and contractual relationships that were very similar to the indenture so-called agreements is hardly surprising on the background of what happened after slavery. That in many ways informal slavery persisted, in many ways informal indenture persisted, and in many parts of the world that has become a template for contracts that are signed today. On the other hand, of course, is the issue of the families of girmityas, and there it's a highly complicated issue, I think, with the way that people disappeared. Like in Totaram Sanadhya's own biography, he never meant to leave for Fiji, and so he didn't tell his family, and so he was taken, he more or less disappeared.
He was taken, and he writes that when he was in Calcutta, his brother was there.
Yeah.
He begged the Arkatis to let him go, and he was not allowed to go.
Yeah, because he was duped, as most people were, duped into agreeing to something that they had no idea what they were actually agreeing for. And so then these people were away, sometimes for 5 years, sometimes they did 2 terms, whichever way, often they stay longer. And coming back and inserting themselves into local society at home was just as difficult as surviving indenture away from home.
We'll talk about that later, because 25,000 Girmityas from Fiji did return, and they would have mingled within the Indian community, and we know Ramchandra's family did very, very well, and I met the great-granddaughter and great-son, they're doing well.
That's fantastic.
And we know that coming back to Totaram Sanadhya, after the Girmit was abolished, he stayed with his wife in Sabarmati Ashram, and he remained there for 25 years, and and he died. And there's another very famous person who also stayed over there. What I want to know from you, if you have any thoughts on that, is the other person is M.K. Gandhi. When he returned from South Africa, he became Mahatma Gandhi, and then he became Father of Nation. Whereas Pandit Totaram left as 17-year-old in the same year as M.K. Gandhi left for South Africa. Totaram came back as Pandit Sanadhya, but there's a contrast. One became Father of Nation, the other one has been forgotten. What are your thoughts on that?
History's memory is very selective, and despite the surprising similarities in the biographies of Gandhi and Sanadhya, Gandhi was a politician first and foremost, which Sanadhya was not. He was a highly socially engaged person who fought for the abolition of indenture, and that was his agenda. And that's how far he was prepared to go into politics and not further.
Yeah, this is very interesting thought on that. I was a politician no more, so I've done both. I'm now an activist rather than a politician. That's a great angle you put on that, but I'm very certain that a person who shared the same ashram as Gandhiji, when they are filmed up there, must admit that I spent a lot of time there, but I looked for some remembrance of Pandit Totaram over there. Also his friend Chaturvedi, Pandit Chaturvedi, who stayed over there. I could not find anything in memory of those two great figures. These two I call the Jain Guru of Girmit. I don't know whether you know about Jain Guru. He's a famous character from Sholay, and there's nothing about the Jain Guru of Girmitya in the ashram. And coming to the end, towards the end of this interview, now that you have inspired a documentary on Pandit Totaram Sanadhya, first question is, what we should do, especially as a young person like you and other young people like you, to bring to life these great historical figures like Pandit Sanadhya, Pandit Chaturvedi and others.
First of all, I think it's very timely to ask these questions now, because history has idolized certain people and forgotten about others, and there is a great need, I think, of complex idols. And Sanadhya is a very complex figure. He had a very complex life, he had very complex thoughts, and he inspires that we have to acknowledge that things are not so easy, that things cannot be easily compartmentalized. So, by putting someone like this into the spotlight, we can see that actually all of us have to negotiate many different domains in our lives instead of just one thing. That's exactly, what Sanadhya inspires.
Well, Fredrik, thanks for first writing that article, which inspired me. I hope that you see fit to write it further.
I hope so too.
And keep you interested in Girmit. We talked about the families of Girmityas here in India,
Yes.
and the 15 million descendants of Girmityas in the global Girmit diaspora is a huge subject, and hope your postdoc research will concentrate in one of those areas. And for now, do you have any final thoughts on this subject of Pandit Totaram before we close? It's a message probably from you to the scholars of Girmit, global Girmit, or those scholars who are thinking of researching on Girmit or Indian diaspora, if you have got any message for them as you're completing your own scholarship on this?
First of all, post-colonial scholarship has often concerned itself with the question of whether or not the subaltern can speak. It's an open question if Sanadhya was or was not a subaltern. In the sense of the colonial state, he definitely was. And he spoke. So one thing is that we have to listen to these voices. Sometimes we have to dig for them and we have to find them, and it's not easy. But they have voices and we have to listen to them. And the other thing, sort of the other takeaway message that I see in that is that we have to really pay attention to what they say. And we have to really pay attention to the way they say it. So, Totaram Sanadhya's account is full of emotions. It's full of social bridging. He talks about, interfaith communities in the lines, in the Girmitya housing. And I think that's very inspiring. And there should be more attention to that.
Thank you, Fredrik. It's such a coincidence. We talked about coincidence. We first spoke with each other some 6 months ago.
Yes.
And then I talked about making documentary of the year. And he mentioned to me that you also coming to India same time frame. And today, the last day of my visit, and last week of your visit to India, we have spoken, we're talking now, and it's such a coincidence. I'm so grateful for Pandit Totaram Sanadhya to have brought us together. So thank you, Fredrik.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you.
I'm also concerned that the history has forgotten the role Pandit Totaram Sanadhya has played as far as Girmit is concerned in Fiji, the service he has done for the Girmityas in Fiji, the role he played in abolition of Girmit, whilst history of Fiji remembers the role played by Gandhiji and Andrews by dedicating schools in their names, both the primary schools and secondary schools. Concerned, I feel sad that even Fiji does not recognize in any significant way the role played by young Totaram in serving the Girmitya communities in Fiji, and the role he has played in the abolition movement of Girmit. I hope that somehow, somewhere, sometimes in future, Fiji does recognize the role played both by Pandit Totaram and Pandit Banarasidas, Chaturvedi, and all others, the Girmityas of Fiji, by dedicating some sort of museum or some sort of memory to recognize their contributions. And I also like to acknowledge the roles played by the global Girmityas over there. Unfortunately, not much is known by the other Girmityas who have played significant roles in serving the Girmitya community and in the abolition movement. And finally, there is indication that from the families of Pandit Chaturvedi, they are actually doing something to raise the memory of Pandit Chaturvedi, and I hope eventually a documentary is made in his memory as well.